On today's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, we're talking all about the various role players that have stepped up for the Detroit Pistons during their recent winning ways. We'll also talk about the trade deadline for Detroit just a few weeks away. Should the Pistons be buyers? Should they be sellers? Has anything changed since the last few weeks of Detroit Pistons basketball? All that and more on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Brought to you by Believe.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
And we are back for another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast brought to you by Believe. It's myself, Aaron Johnson. Joining me this week is Jasper Apollonia. And the Pistons don't look now. Don't ask Ashton the trainer. But the Detroit Pistons are the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, 23-21. After a big win in the standings last night against the Atlanta Hawks. The win actually allowed them to jump Atlanta in the standings. So 6th seed. Ashton the trainer's happy, and we're here to talk about the state of Detroit Pistons basketball. Jas, my friend, I know we just talked last night during the game, but how you doing about 24 hours later?
I'm doing great. I'm glad you brought that up. It was a lot of fun doing that little beta test of playback last night. And thank you to any and all of you who joined us. That was a good time. I think it's something we're going to keep on doing. And it was a real blast, especially since the Pistons came away with a quite a convincing victory. I know we were all a little perturbed at the end when they were almost literally trying to give away the ball game, but luckily Detroit had at that point built up a substantial enough lead that the last couple minutes really didn't matter all that much. Although if you are a box score watcher, you will notice that's now back-to-back 10 turnover games for Cade Cunningham. But as we noted on the stream last night, didn't seem to matter. The Pistons really rolled. They rolled against Houston on Monday night as well. Back-to-back super convincing wins for the Pistons after a couple of tough losses. One of them to the Indiana Pacers, who are exactly one game ahead of them in the 5 seed. And Aaron, you said don't look now, they're in the 6 seed. They are 2 games out of the 4 seed. Who would have guessed?
Yeah, I mean, I know I've said this a few separate times now, but I mean, I said prior to the season starting, 6 seed would be a miracle. It would be the best case scenario for this team. And, you know, right now they are the 6th seed and they have a legitimate chance to do even better than that as the season goes on. I mean, it all depends on what other teams do at the trade deadline. If the Pistons can stay, you know, as healthy as they've been recently. I mean, obviously playing without Jaden Ivey is a significant loss, but what they do at the deadline, if they're able to get Jaden Ivey back at some point, like all those factors are certainly going to play a role. But man, the Pistons are playing really, really good basketball, and I'm really pumped to talk about it because it's just reinvigorating to be watching and covering a team that for the first time in half a decade is playing any sort of inspiring basketball. So really excited to get into it. But before we do that, absolutely have to give a word to our weekly sponsor. As always, it's BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, to the NHL and UFC. BetOnline is the number one sports betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Also want to take a moment here. Maybe you're just getting into Pistons basketball for the first time in a while. Maybe you're a new fan. If you just found this podcast, maybe you've been listening for a while and you haven't done it either, take a moment to go hit the subscribe button, the follow button, wherever you're watching or listening to the show from. You know, if you're one of the many that watch on YouTube, just go hit that subscribe button, toss a like, leave a comment, let us know what you think of the show. Spotify, need you to follow the show, need you to leave us that rating. Same thing for Apple Podcasts. So wherever you're watching or listening from, please do us that significant favor and follow the show. We greatly appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get into our first topic. And I think it goes back to the first of the year when the Pistons were playing the Magic. Jaden Ivey obviously goes down. We later find out the significance of the injury. And I think many thought, okay, it's been, a fun ride for Detroit so far this year, but now this team is going to come back down to reality a little bit. They're not going to be able to be as competitive as they've been. You're going to see, the wheels fall off a little bit here. And since the start of the new year, it's been the exact opposite. The Pistons remain one of the hottest teams in basketball. Obviously, they dropped a couple of games last week, but picked up a big win, as we mentioned at the top of the show, against Atlanta. They remain playing very competitive basketball. They remain in the thick of the playoff race. And it's a lot of guys stepping up alongside Cade Cunningham, because obviously Cade Cunningham's the star of the show. He's getting all of that national attention, but other guys are stepping up too. Cade's not been doing this alone, and a number of guys really have picked up their play. Jasper, I'll start with you here. Who's been stepping up for Detroit since the start of the new year the most, you think?
Honestly, man, there's so many guys that you could put into this slot. And I think that that's kind of the story of this Pistons season. They have just been smashing our expectations left and right, even our best expectations. Like you said, we were, I believe, a little higher on this team than a lot of people were. And we were looking at them saying, hey, best case scenario, maybe they win, 35 games, sneak into the play-in. As of right now, they're on pace to win, I believe, 43, 44 games. If they were to win 44 games, that would be a 30-win improvement from the year before. It'd be the sixth greatest margin of improvement in the history of the NBA. So what they're doing right now is historically like an incredible turnaround. And when Jaden Ivey went down, you saw for sure a lot of people thinking, okay, this is where it all starts to come apart, because we saw how much the Pistons struggled throughout this year when Cade Cunningham wasn't on the floor. And it hasn't been that at all. The supporting cast has completely stepped up. And for me, I think the number one guy that I'm at first going to look at is Tim Hardaway Jr. Tim Hardaway Jr. started off this year really hot, went through a prolonged cold stretch. He was shooting just really poorly. Since Jaden Ivey has gone down, and I think this is an important thing to note as well. Jaden Ivey, of course, took a lot of pressure off Cade Cunningham from a ball handling perspective, but he also was one of the Pistons' most prolific and consistent shooters this year. He was really big for their spacing, and Tim Hardaway Jr. has stepped up big time in that department. In the 10 games since Ivey went down, Hardaway is scoring 14.4 points a game. He's shooting 45% from three. He's hitting 3 threes a game, shooting almost 7 per game. I mean, 45% is just wonderful. And more so than that, you're seeing the effort and all those other things come through. Over that stretch, the Pistons are +6 with him on the floor. Net rating, 115 offensive rating, 109 defensive rating. He's just really stepped up in the ways that they've desperately needed without Jaden Ivey. They needed something from their shooting guards. They needed more than just Malik Beasley. And Tim Hardaway Jr. has been a huge part of that. So that's the first guy I'm looking at. But Aaron, there's definitely more, right?
I'm actually totally shocked that you went with Tim Hardaway Jr. I for sure thought you were going to go with who I'm going to pivot to now, and that's Tobias Harris. I will make a quick note on Tim Hardaway Jr. because one of the things that I looked at with him as well is he's actually getting to the line at a fairly significant rate this month as well. I think he's at 36 free throw attempts so far this month in 11 games. So he had not gotten close to that in any of the previous months this season. So that's also something I think is underrated in what he's been able to do since Ivey went down. He is getting to the line at a really good pace right now for this team. And that's definitely a big deal. I will pivot to Tobias Harris here because he has been such a rock for this team since Jaden Ivey went down. I think there was definitely some frustration from the community, the Pistons fan community, that Harris wasn't having these significant scoring outbursts or posting these big numbers, at least in the first few months of the season. I think everyone expected a little bit more from him, and I think the Pistons might have expected a little bit more from him, considering how hard they tried to force feed him at the start of the season after he kind of started the first few games a little bit slower than many had anticipated. But he's been really good since Jaden Ivey went down. I mean, Jasper, you've gone over the statistics before with Tobias Harris, but his scoring has gone up. His playmaking has certainly gone up, which I think is, I talked about what Tim Hardaway Jr.'s done that's maybe gone a little under the radar with his free throw shooting, but Tobias Harris has sneakily done a much better job playing a little bit of some extra facilitator for Detroit.
He's second on the team in assists since Ivy went down. 3
Yeah.
per game. It's not a lot, but it's something.
But it's something. And this is a team that, right now doesn't really have other guys outside of Cade Cunningham that are setting up guys to score. So those 3 assists from Tobias Harris are a big deal. I mean, they really are. But his efficiency's up. His playmaking is up. His scoring is up. He's playing big minutes. The rotation has kind of shifted now. When Jaden Ivey was playing, Cade Cunningham and Tobias Harris were kind of hand in hand with their minutes. They played together. Now JB Bickerstaff has changed it to where when Cade comes out, Tobias Harris is on the floor, and that's putting, some extra stress on Tobias Harris. And he's managed it very, very well. He's really taken on that second dog for this team. Maybe the thought was prior to the season that Harris was going to be Detroit's second player or second best player, and I think that would have been a fair assumption. It wasn't the case when Jaden Ivey was healthy this year, but since he's gone down, Tobias Harris has certainly been that for Detroit. I mean, what he's doing it can't go overlooked. He's been a huge help for them, and it's not a good thing that Jaden Ivey's got hurt, but Tobias Harris has certainly found himself a little bit more since that happened.
Yeah, I mean, net rating of plus 13.6 with him on the floor, highest on the team. That's better than Cade Cunningham, by the way. Like, Cade is doing great, don't get me wrong. Plus 9.7 is nothing to shake a stick at. But Tobias Harris right now is really contributing to this team's success. I mean, he has the best offensive rating of any regular player, 118.6 points per possession. Like, they are scoring at a very high rate with him on the floor. And he has the best defensive rating of any regular player as well at 105 points per possession. So you're really seeing all those little things kind of come together for him. And I think, there are other guys we could talk about in here as well. Jalen Duren has really stepped up his game since Jaden Ivey went down. He's shooting 74% from the field right now. It's like all dunks. He's only shooting six and a half shots a game, but averaging almost 12 points per game, which is just insane. 11 rebounds. He's just been a lot more active, and you're starting to see it in the steal and block numbers. Almost a steal per game, almost a block and a half per game. So he's been a lot more engaged, which I think is very interesting. I'm not sure if that is a symptom of Ivy or it's just, he was playing so poorly beforehand. But he has really stepped up. Asar Thompson, some of the things he does, man, are so like eye-popping statistically. Of course, you see the incredible smoothness, the glide, the rebounding when he's on the floor. But I mean, he has just done some insane stuff. He has a 44% steal percentage this year. Or sorry, over the last 10 games, like 3.3 steals per 36 minutes, just insane numbers. So yeah, it's been really cool, and everybody is stepping up in the little ways. Yes, they definitely need more help, and I think that's going to be something we're going to talk about in our second topic. And yes, Cade Cunningham is carrying this team, but last night in the first half, 11 guys got on the floor, 9 of them had an assist. I thought that really spoke to how they played in that game on both ends of the floor. They were engaged and they played together as a unit, and they did the exact same thing against Houston. It was really cool to see them come out there and be more physical, more tough mentally than the other team. And really play as a unit. I mean, there's that clip going around of Asar last night where he's for an entire possession guarding every single guy on the floor. It's just incredible what they're doing right now. And, of course, we're giving these shout outs, but let's also just quickly say Cade Cunningham, since Jaden Ivey went down, 27.6 points, 9 assists, 6 rebounds, 48% from the floor, 37% from three, and 86% from the line to go along with a healthy 5.6 turnovers per game. So you're really seeing this, I think this whole team, you're really, really seeing it just all come together. They're stepping up and replacing Jaden Ivey in the best way they can, which is with a bunch of guys stepping up in little ways.
Yeah. No, I wanted to give a shout out to Cade Cunningham as well, because the play is certainly gone up, and you have to think about all of the extra pressure defenses can put on him now, because there's not another guy that can get downhill, can create, can get to the rim. With Jaden Ivey out of the lineup, I think that was one of the things that made it easier for Detroit to be kind of like that two-headed monster with how well Ivey has played this year when he was active, because, teams couldn't just double Cade off every screen and roll, which is what most teams are deciding to do now, because Jaden Ivey was going to be that other ball handler, be that other guy that could get to the ram and put pressure on defenses. Ivey was also shooting very well from the three-point line. I think he was around 40%. So the defense has been able to put a lot more pressure on Cade Cunningham. And yes, the turnovers have certainly gone up, and it's to be expected. But, I mean, you'll live with him averaging 1 or 2 more turnovers a game if he's giving you the numbers and the efficiency scoring-wise that he's currently giving you. So he's been really, really good. I don't want that to go overlooked, but what does often get overlooked is what are those role players doing? And it also feels like for Detroit right now, it's every night that someone else is going to give them, that big game. And it's kind of what it has to be when it's really one star and a ton of other role players. Like last night against Atlanta, Simone Fontecchio had a really nice game. The other night against Houston, it was somebody else that had, major impact on the game outside of Cade Cunningham. So it's like on a nightly basis, you don't always know who it's going to be, but the Pistons have several guys that just give them that lift when it's needed.
Absolutely. And, I know that the turnover numbers are ugly. There's no question about that. But I think you need to, look at them in context. And the Jaden Ivey injury is a big piece of that context. Who else on this team? Like we said, Tobias Harris, it's great that he's stepping up with 3 assists per game. But it's 3 assists per game. And that's your number 2 passer on this team right now in terms of playmaking. That's just not going to cut it. So those kind of turnovers are inevitable. Cade's carrying a 34% usage since Jaden Ivey went down. And when defenses are doing stuff like the Hawks did last night, which is, we saw it from the opening tip. They were blitzing every single pick and roll from the jump with Cade. They were just like, we are going to put all this pressure on him. I don't think you notice the turnovers as much, even though there's so many of them, because turnovers are inevitable and they're preferable with Cade over some of the other guys. Like, what is your other option? Really? You're going to have Marcus Sasser running sets for 20 minutes a game. You can't trust Asar Thompson with that. Malik Beasley, absolutely not. So your hands are tied in that regard. Yeah, it's high, but they are turnovers you are absolutely okay with. You can live with them. They did not affect the outcome of that game against Houston or against Atlanta last night. And to be clear, Cade was the best player on the floor for both of those games, regardless of what the defenses threw at him. So, yeah, man, this team is really, really coming together, and it's been very impressive to see them cover up for each other's flaws and step up their games over the last, month, pretty much, since Jaden Ivey went down. So, very encouraging stuff, especially as we're entering the middle of a 5-game road stretch.
Yeah, that kind of takes us into our second topic now. Detroit's continuing to win. They're continuing to climb up the standings in the Eastern Conference. As every game passes, like this starts to feel a little bit more real that this team is a competitive team. And we've kind of heard some back and forth on the Pistons' mindset as the trade deadline nears. There's been a lot of talk since the start of the season that the Pistons are going to be that team that's waiting to hop in on a deal, use their cap space, use their roster spot to take on an unwanted, bloated contract, bloated player from another team, with draft capital attached. And that's how the Pistons were going to attack this deadline. That's how Trajan Langdon was going to utilize this first year, was to accumulate some more assets for the rest of his tenure. But we've also now started to see some reports that things might be a little bit more fluid in the mindset of Detroit's front office. We're hearing that they might look to be more of a buyer. They might look to improve the roster. And in my mind, they could certainly kind of do a little bit of both. I think that they could take on an unwanted contract and get back some picks, but they could also find a player out there that could very much help them in what Detroit needs. I think the bigger question is, if the Pistons do decide to be more of a buyer or decide to buy at all, how much of a buyer should they be? I've maintained that I don't think this is the year to go in on a guy like Zach LaVine or Brandon Ingram or one of those bigger names in the trade market. We've talked about Cam Johnson on the Nets and Brooklyn wanting 2 first-round picks for him. I just don't think it makes sense for Detroit to be that much of a buyer at that price point. But I've also talked about, and I wrote about it this week on palaceofpistons.com. Make sure to go subscribe for free if you haven't yet. The link to our website is in whatever show notes on whatever platform that you're listening on. But I also wrote about how much this team needs another ball handler. And I brought up a couple options in my piece earlier this week. Some of the names I looked at: Colin Sexton, Lonzo Ball, and then on a much smaller note, someone like Reggie Jackson. Jasper, how much of a buyer should Detroit be? Is the Lonzo Ball, Colin Sexton territory kind of the sweet spot? Should they aim a little bit higher? Do they not need to go for a bigger contract like Ball or like Sexton? Where do you see Detroit operating best at the deadline?
Yeah, if you tuned into playback last night, you heard me crap all over Aaron's Reggie Jackson back to Detroit idea. I'm not interested in that. I do think they should aim a little higher than Reggie Jackson's corpse. But I really do believe this is one of those situations where we are pretty much in lockstep, Aaron. I don't think they should be looking at a Zach LaVine, a Brandon Ingram. This team has gotten this far. We've just covered for the last 20 minutes on how far this team has come on chemistry and team play. And the way I look at it, if you bring in that second star, that big time scorer, a Zach LaVine, a Brandon Ingram, a guy who's gonna get his 20 plus every single night, I think you put yourself at the risk of really messing with chemistry, because it's going to require, even though the Pistons do have available cap space right now, you're going to have to move guys off the team. It's going to require you probably moving off of like Tobias Harris or somebody like that, Isaiah Stewart, God forbid. And it doesn't really feel like the Pistons are in a position to do that. I think they're at the point where they need to make a couple of smaller additions. Colin Sexton, maybe. He's a little too much of like kind of what I described right there, where he's a little too score happy for me. But Alonzo Ball would be incredible on this team. I'm still very interested in getting more of like a pure off guard as well. I've said like I think it's worth calling the Sacramento Kings, just seeing what it'll take for like a Kevin Huerter, Keon Ellis. I definitely think those are the kind of moves they should be making. But on the other hand, as you've said, they have this cap space. They should be absorbing salary. For me, the ideal Pistons trade deadline is they use that cap space to help facilitate a seemingly now inevitable, any day now, Jimmy Butler trade out of Miami. Like that's gonna happen. It does really seem like the idea of him to the Suns and then Middleton to Heat and then Beal to the Bucks, like it seems as though there is smoke there. And in order to make that work, they would need to have the Pistons involved as a third team. So the way I see it, Pistons should probably try and get involved in something like that in the framework of a similar type deal, and then match salary afterwards and just try and work around the margins of this roster. Try and pick up that second guard. Sasser has had some okay moments since Ivy went down, but to me, it's very clear he's not somebody you can depend on as a secondary guard. We discussed it on playback last night. There is a 5 to 7 minute stretch every single game where the Pistons offense just cannot do anything. And they're very lucky to have Asar Thompson back. It's really where you feel his impact, having him and Ron Holland and Isaiah Stewart, because they haven't gotten destroyed in those minutes like they would have last year, but there is a lot of room for improvement. And if you want to actually do something and like get into the 6th seed and make a little noise, win your first playoff game in 16 years, oh my God, 17 years, Jesus Christ, like you're gonna need some upgrades. So small, medium bodied moves. That's what I'm looking for. Nothing too big, nothing too small, just right. No outgoing picks. That's really how I feel. And no more than one veteran leaving.
No outgoing second round picks. You wouldn't move off any of those.
It would depend. Depends who I'm getting back.
I mean,
But even then, I'd still be. I mean, I'll move a second round pick if it's the thing where I can get an upgrade over, say, a Tim Hardaway Jr. or a Simone Fontecchio. If I can do that, okay, I will part with a second. God forbid, maybe two. But
yeah, like if you're going after Colin Sexton, for example, you're not giving up a first round pick for him if you're Detroit. So if you still want your first round pick for him, like then it's probably off of the table. But if you're giving up an assortment of second round picks that you can buy on draft night any year you want to, like I think you pull the trigger on that absolutely. You make the salaries match and you go get Colin Sexton even if it costs you 4 second round picks. I mean, second round picks are they're a dime a dozen. Every draft night now, we just see teams just here's some cash, here's some draft rights and some cash. We'll take that second round pick. So
Aaron, an important thing to your point. Sorry, really quickly though. If you do absorb salary first, you're probably going to get second round picks back. So I mean ideally you could actually come out with a surplus even if you do move off of some. So I just thought that might be relevant.
Yeah, I'm curious what everyone thinks on this because I certainly think they need another ball handler, another facilitator on the roster. I think the genuine reaction that I got from most people is Lonzo Ball was a good idea. And I agree. I think Lonzo Ball on an expiring contract, so he continues to give Detroit that cap flexibility that it appears they really want. But he gives them a guy that is a really good facilitator, obviously. He is still a good defender. And he has a positive impact on a very mediocre Chicago Bulls team. So if the Bulls are looking to get off some salary for whatever reason, we know they're open to making deals on Nikola Vucevic and Zach LaVine. I'm sure it's the same case with Lonzo Ball. Again, he's on an expiring contract. So with where they're trending, it would make sense for them to try to get something out of him, especially with all the other guards that they have on their roster. So really like the idea of Lonzo Ball. But, is there any other position that Detroit should be looking at? I think one of the other spots that I've heard people say is they need to get another offensive-minded 3-4, which I can understand, but I don't know where those minutes in the rotation really come for that theoretical piece. Unless you're moving off of Simone Fontecchio, Asar Thompson's going to continue to play a really big role. He's moved into the starting lineup. Tobias Harris is playing very well. You're not taking minutes away from him. I don't think Detroit wants to really take minutes away from Ron Holland with how well he's playing. And then you have Tim Hardaway Jr., you have Malik Beasley. I just don't unless you're making a clear-cut upgrade and you're getting someone like Cam Johnson. I don't know who is in that tier below that's available that really moves the needle for this team.
I think you could reasonably upgrade over Fontecchio. I do think you can. Another guy I'd be interested in would be, and this could come into play if the Pistons are a facilitator in a Jimmy Butler trade with Phoenix, Tyus Jones, if they could somehow snag him from Phoenix, he's on a veteran minimum, so it really would be nothing. You could just absorb him into your cap space right off the bat. I mean, if they could get him as a backup point guard, that would be just tremendous for Detroit. You could even start him occasionally in certain situations. And I think that that would be good for Cade in terms of, if you are somebody that's like, oh, the turnovers are an issue, that's not how I see it. But like, I want to see Cade get more off-ball reps. I do think a 34% usage is a little higher than I want to see for him, especially considering we are 42, 43 games into the year. Like, we still have half a season to play, man. And I don't know how long he can maintain that kind of usage. So I do think there is a somewhat like it's not just to make your team better, but also to like take some of that off of Cade and don't put him in a position where he's going to have be breaking down at the end of the year, because you don't want to go into the playoffs and then it's meaningless because the guy who got you there can't perform at the highest level. So I really do think they should be looking into that.
And I'm sure they are. Like, I'm sure they're interested in that because they were reportedly interested in Tyus Jones in the offseason. They offered Tyus Jones a contract, and he chose to sign with Phoenix because Phoenix was a contender, quote unquote. And now we sit here and the Pistons have a better record than the Phoenix Suns. So maybe there's, a desire on his end. If he ends up being in that deal, like, it would make a ton of sense for Detroit. I think that would be like that would be a great move for them, and one that like I wouldn't imagine happening, but if it somehow does, where the salary works out that Phoenix has to cut salary and Tyus Jones has to be the sacrificial lamb, like I think Detroit would greatly benefit from that. So if they can make that work, that would be an excellent move for them. But you're right. Like, it's not just about improving the roster. It's about taking some pressure off of Cade Cunningham, because the usage and the expectations are just not sustainable. Like, the wear and tear you're putting on him, and I get he's young, and I don't buy into like needing to rest guys or this or that, but you're just asking a lot. And if they could find a way to, without mortgaging future assets or without, hurting other guys on the roster, if they can find a way to take some of that burden off of Cade Cunningham, it would be a really good decision. And I think Tyus Jones is an excellent name to add to that group of guards that I had already written about on palaceofpistons.com. One other name I'll throw out there, like, what about John Collins if you're looking at a forward upgrade? I go back to the Jazz, but Collins kind of gives you some stuff that I think Detroit could use. Offensive ability, can shoot it a little bit, obviously very athletic. You feel like he'd finish well at the rim, working in the pick and roll with Cade Cunningham. Could maybe go small ball with him if you need to, playing him at the 5. I don't know how Detroit gets him, but is there any interest there? Like, does that work for them? Because you can bring him off the bench. Is that a big enough upgrade over Simone Fontecchio?
I think that there is something there. I mean, yes, when you compare him to Fontecchio, I do think that is an upgrade for you because he is a better athlete. He can score. It's not that big of a difference to me just because they're both backup power forwards, and especially on this team. But yeah, Collins is. I've always kind of liked John Collins. I don't know why. I maybe have a little bit of a soft spot for him, but when given the opportunity, he's just more consistent. Like, the guy shoots what? He's shooting 44% from 3 this year. And with Utah, he's shooting what? 39% from 3-point land over the last 2 years. So he's been a good shooter. He's a better athlete. I think he gives you another option in the pick and roll when Duran's not out there. And, I've never really thought of Isaiah Stewart as a particularly effective pick and roll guy. So I think when you're playing Cade with backup units or even backup point guards are out there, it just gives you another offensive wrinkle. You could even run Spain pick and roll. Like, you could, I think Stewart is enough of a shooter to where you could hypothetically run a little bit of those actions as well. So, yeah, I would like John Collins. I just worry what the price tag is going to be on that because he has been producing at a pretty high level this year. The other thing I would worry about maybe would be defense. But for me, Fontecchio hasn't been a good enough defender to where getting a worse defender in Collins would have such an effect, especially when you're playing him alongside off the bench, Isaiah Stewart, Asar Thompson, Ron Holland, like really, really good defenders. So I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, in 30 minutes a game for Collins this year, he's averaging 18 points, 8.5 rebounds, 45% from the 3-point line, 2.5 assists per game as well. I mean, I'm sure that just kind of is more just organic within their offense than him actually doing a ton of facilitating. But I mean, if they are looking to upgrade there, I certainly think it adds to what they can do offensively because that offense does tend to get a little stale at times when it's just Cade Cunningham, go get us a basket or find that open shooter. And if you have that rim finisher that can also space the floor a little bit, it's a wrinkle that you can add to Detroit's offense that they just don't really have right now. So, yeah, I'd be interested in John Collins. I don't remember what his contract is right now. Is it still that really big extension from the Hawks days, or is it
I
small?
don't think the extension was ever really that crazy. I thought it was like 18 million a year.
Is that all it is? Oh,
It's not that crazy. They really just like salary dumped him. I could completely be wrong. I need to actually find this right now. No, 25. Sorry.
five. So it's not an
But
instant
yeah.
contract.
I mean, it's less than what Tobias Harris is making.
I would be open to it.
Yeah.
I think they should prioritize another ball handler over a forward ad. But if they do go that route, I think Utah makes a lot of sense as a trade partner because they have a few of those guys that could help other teams right now. And
The thing is, you wouldn't be able to just like absorb his salary. You'd actually have to send out salary as well. I just don't really know how you make it work, to be honest with you. But yeah, he would be another option, and he'd be another guy who can space the floor for Cade a little bit. Quickly, just circling back, we talked about, Cade catch and shoot. He's shooting 42% on catch and shoot threes this year, man. He is stroking them, but he's only taking 2.2 a game. Like, you really would like to see him get more opportunities to shoot that shot. Yeah, I think Collins is a name that I definitely would be interested in. It's all about the price tag, though. It's all about the price tag there, and I think that's true with anybody that the Pistons are going after in this trade deadline. Um, I think it is a tougher job than people are making it out to be for Detroit because people are going, well, they could just absorb salary and like make it work, and it's like, yeah, they can, but like there is a need to improve. Like there are very clear holes in this roster. It's great to make the playoffs, but like you want to win a game or two while you're there at least. If not, in this Eastern Conference, potentially win a series. I mean, if you're the 6 seed and you're going up like a 3 seed, I don't feel scared of anyone past the Celtics, honestly. I'm not scared of the Knicks. I'm not scared. I'm a little scared of the Bucks, but really, I'm not scared of the Pacers. I'm not scared of the Magic. The Pistons can theoretically win a matchup there. So I think you need to put yourself in the best position to not just like give yourself momentum, but give yourself like a real reason for people to buy back into this franchise. You're starting to see it slowly, but if you really want to win those casuals back and stop the Jared Goff, Jared Goff, that's how you got to do it. Like you got to win a playoff game.
No, I think everything you said there is fair. One last thing I'll add on this before we wrap is, you mentioned with the John Collins trade stuff that they'd have to give back some salary in a deal like that. And really the only tradable contracts that they have are Simone Fontecchio and Tim Hardaway Jr. in terms, and I guess Tobias Harris in terms of like, big enough numbers on the contract that they're able to make a move. And it's like
Stewart.
Fontecchio. Yeah, you could throw Stewart in there as well, but I just don't think Detroit wants to move off of any of those guys, particularly, the guys that they added this past offseason, those 3 veterans, Beasley, Harris, and Hardaway Jr. Like, none of them are the greatest players, but they've all played such a huge role in this turnaround and are so well liked and respected in that locker room by their teammates and by the coaching staff as well. That I just think Detroit would be very, very cautious about making anything that could be viewed as somewhat of a lateral to minimal upgrade if it comes with moving off of one or two of those guys. And I think that's smart because what they do, not just on the court, but in that locker room and the experience and leadership that they bring, it's really important. And it's also really important to have some continuity on this roster. So, for those guys to be a part of this turnaround that the Pistons have experienced this year, it's very meaningful. And I think that the Pistons will and should be very cautious of moving off of any of those guys unless it's for a real significant upgrade.
Totally agree with you there, Aaron. I think for me, Tim Hardaway Jr. is the most movable just because he is an expiring contract, and I don't feel a great need necessarily to bring him back next year unless it's for like a veterans minimum or something like that. But other than that, yeah, I think we're on the same page here. We want the Pistons to make moves. We recognize that there are upgrades that need to happen for this roster, but there is downside to doing that as well, just because of the style that they're playing. They are really playing, it must be said, Pistons basketball. It is really shocking because last year I couldn't imagine anything further from what I recognize as Pistons basketball being played out there on the court. And this year, the switch just flipped, man. I'm like, yeah, this is what a Detroit basketball team should look like. Like, everybody plays together, everybody busts their ass, nobody takes any crap. When one guy goes down, everybody else steps up. Like, yeah, my God, I'm watching Pistons hoops again. Somebody pinch me, I'm dreaming.
The bar was so low for so long that this third round has been just an insane feat to watch.
It's like dating in New York. You know what I mean? There's so many bad guys out there. I can just go out and like open a door and buy a drink and, not try and grab a girl's butt within 30 seconds of beating her. And instantly I'm like 95th percentile of like good guy. They really make it so easy for me. So that's basically what last year's team did. They were like the meme where it's like flirting versus sexual harassment. That's basically what it was. Last year's team was the sexual harassment team. This one's the flirting one, and I'll tell you, it's working.
The Pistons have Riz.
The Pistons have Riz. The Pistons are goated with the sauce. Low key, they're kind of nice with it, fam. So,
okay, before we get to brain rot, I think we've got to end this show here. So,
for everybody's sake,
the trade deadline just a few weeks away. Before this show comes out, but after we've recorded, we'll hear the NBA All-Star Game starters announced. I think Cade Cunningham's in the running, but I'll just say based off, how the fans have voted and how pedigree seems to work in the NBA, I'd be pretty surprised if he got the starting nod over Donovan Mitchell and probably Jalen Brunson. I'd have to imagine those will be the two starting guards for the East, but maybe Cade sneaks in. He has gotten a lot of national spotlight recently, but it'll actually be next Thursday that we find out the reserve. So if Cunningham is not named a starter later tonight after we record, he'll have a chance to be named to the roster as a reserve next Thursday. So we'll certainly be watching that, as I know everybody here and a lot of the people watching certainly feel that Cade Cunningham deserves to be named to the All-Star team for the first time in his career. But that is going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Bleak. Make sure you go subscribe wherever you watched or listened to today's episode from. Leave us that rating, leave us that comment. We greatly appreciate your support. And we will see you guys next week for another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Take care, everyone.